public imagination is held captive by the physics of incoming missiles. This is a calculated distraction. The kinetic cost and low probability of penetrating modern air defenses make a mass missile launch an act of strategic bankruptcy. The primary threat vector is not loud, it is silent. The entire global financial system, trillions in daily liquidity, is not in a vault. It is data, transmitted as pulses of light through a handful of fiber optic cables on the ocean floor. CSIS reports confirm that rival powers have mapped this infrastructure with precision. It is the unprotected economic jugular of the West. This is not a kinetic war, it is a solvency crisis triggered at depth. The second vector operates at an altitude of 20,000 kilometers. U.S. military dominance, evidenced by the surgical leveling of facilities in Venezuela, source number 1, is contingent on a fragile network of ISR and GPS satellites. A peer competitor does not need to kinetically destroy these assets, they only need to blind them. Laser dazzling is a low-cost, asymmetric capability that renders multi-billion-dollar platforms inert. The result is the blind Leviathan, a military force with unparalleled conventional power, but its central nervous system has been severed. It cannot see, it cannot target, and its launch-on warning protocols face a catastrophic data void. This induced chaos is the mathematical equalizer for a state fielding degraded porcupine tanks. Source number 2. They do not attack the Leviathan's armor, they attack its eyes. The motive for the expanded kinetic phase in Ukraine is systemically misunderstood. It was not an act of strength, but a desperate maneuver to solve an internal solvency crisis. CSIS analysis confirms the conflict became a severe domestic liability for the Kremlin. The political and economic cost of the protracted operation began to exceed any potential strategic gain, creating a feedback loop of instability. This domestic liability was amplified by acute conventional force degradation. The Porcupine Tank Indicator, reported in open-source intelligence, is not a sign of battlefield innovation. It is a data point confirming industrial exhaustion. These are not weapons of a superpower. They are the artifacts of a military unable to absorb the kinetic cost of a peer-level conflict. The state's primary instrument of power was failing. When a nuclear-armed state faces both military and political insolvency, the strategic calculus is reset to a zero-sum protocol. Weakness forces a pivot to asymmetry. Unable to win symmetrically, the objective shifts to making the conflict prohibitively expensive for the West. The conventional failure mathematically compels a lower threshold for tactical nuclear use. It ceases to be a weapon of last resort and becomes a primary tool for coercive de-escalation and regime survival. This is not a miscalculation. It is a feature of systemic decay. The pivot to nuclear posturing is the final, rational act of a power whose conventional options have been exhausted. The war is no longer about territory. It is about forcing a settlement to prevent internal collapse. The weakness is the accelerant. The entire blueprint for modern land warfare is fiscally insolvent. The math is irrefutable. Analysts at RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute, have established the core equation. The kinetic cost of a modern main battle tank is approximately $5 million. The cost of the FPV drone that delivers a kill shot is $500. This is not a tactical imbalance. It is a systemic solvency crisis for any nation attempting to field a conventional, armor-heavy force. This economic asymmetry is the primary accelerant behind the conventional force degradation we see in peer competitors. The emergence of so-called porcupine tanks, desperate, field-expedient cages welded onto armor, are not a sign of tactical genius. They are a balance sheet liability made visible. a physical admission that the state can no longer afford to protect its high-value assets against low-cost threats. Each one is a rolling indicator of systemic failure. This mechanism is known as the democratization of violence. It describes the systemic collapse of a state's monopoly on effective, high-end kinetic force. When the financial barrier to entry for destroying a multi-million-dollar platform is reduced to the price of a consumer electronic, the very concept of conventional overmatch evaporates. The battlefield has been financially flattened, forcing a zero-sum recalculation for the weaker power. When a nuclear-armed state can no longer afford to compete conventionally, its deterrent strategy mathematically pivots. The conventional shield becomes an economic impossibility, exposing the nuclear core. Every drone that neutralizes a tank is not just an asset write-off. It is a direct input that forces a lower threshold for tactical nuclear use. The overwhelming conventional strength of one power becomes the direct accelerant for a nuclear launch-on-warning protocol in another. This is not a policy choice, it's a mathematical certainty. The core systemic risk is no longer a political miscalculation. It is a protocol known as launch-on-warning. According to analysts at RUSI, this doctrine is not aggressive, it is defensive. It is the logical response of a state that fears a decapitation strike, an attack so swift it destroys your ability to retaliate. The protocol is simple. If early warning systems detect incoming nuclear missiles, you launch your own arsenal before the enemy's warheads arrive. You do not wait for impact. Waiting is a death sentence. This protocol becomes an accelerant for catastrophe when one side experiences severe conventional force degradation. The porcupine tank indicator referenced in reports from the U.S. Sun. A state that cannot win a conventional conflict becomes mathematically dependent on its nuclear deterrent. It cannot afford to absorb a first strike. This creates a hair-trigger posture, where the solvency of the entire state rests on not being hit first. Now, inject a new vector, the fog of digital war. CSIS reports confirm the primary liability in this new architecture is not the missile, but the sensor. A sophisticated cyber attack can blind a nation's early warning radar and satellite network. The screens go black. The commander in the bunker is now faced with a zero-sum choice in under 6 minutes. Is this a system failure, or is it the prelude to an attack designed to blind them before the kinetic cost is delivered? Waiting for confirmation is a gamble they cannot afford, especially after witnessing the kinetic destruction of military facilities documented by Axios satellite imagery. In this state of total sensory deprivation, the launch-on-warning protocol defaults to the worst-case assumption. Fear of conventional annihilation forces a nuclear decision. The commander is not launching on a warning, they are launching on silence. This is the mathematical certainty of the digital battlefield. The thesis is now operational. U.S. kinetic dominance, demonstrated by the leveling of military facilities in the Venezuela vector, has a mathematical consequence. As peer competitors exhibit conventional force degradation, evidenced by porcupine tanks, their strategic calculus shifts from deterrence by parity to deterrence by asymmetric punishment. The kinetic cost of a symmetric response is unsurvivable for them. Therefore, their response protocol must become non-kinetic and non-attributable. According to RUSI threat models, a cornered nuclear power will not immediately default to a nuclear launch. The first step is a calibration shot, a limited, high-impact, deniable strike on critical civilian infrastructure to test the adversary's response thresholds and demonstrate capability without triggering a launch-on-warning protocol. The objective is to inflict maximum economic damage with minimum forensic traceability, creating systemic chaos mirroring official warnings about transportation disruptions. The forecast is therefore a function of this logic. Within the next 12 months, expect a 48 to 72 hour attribution impossible data blackout at a primary U.S. maritime port. The event will not be a power grid failure, it will be a systemic logic failure of the crane and container management software. It will be officially attributed to a corrupted software patch or a third-tier ransomware group. It is, however, a strategic signal, a calibration shot.